You're standing on a hillside above the Dead Sea. It's 11,300 years ago. The wind's dry, the ground is cracked, and you have no crops, no plow, no calendar telling you when the rains are due. And yet, you're building a bank vault. Not for gold, for barley. 4 small structures, walls raised off the ground, floors built to let air move underneath. Rodents can't climb in, damp can't rot what's inside. You are protecting food from a season you haven't seen yet, using a season you barely survived. That place is called drought, and here's the detail that flips the whole story on its head. You'd assume farming came first, grow the crop, then figure out how to store the extra, storage as an afterthought. The dirt says otherwise. These granaries are 1,000 years older than farming itself. People built weatherproof, rodent-proof storage before they ever planted a single seed on purpose. Let that land for a second. The instinct to prepare came before the ability to grow. Planning came before planting.
So if these people weren't farmers yet, what were they? And why did bad weather is coming matter enough to build stone and mud vaults for wild grass seeds? Because the alternative was brutal. Right around this time, the climate had just staggered out of a 1,200-year cold snap called the Younger Dryas. Good years and bad years didn't follow any pattern you could bank on. One decade, plenty of rain. The next, almost none. Nobody could tell you which one was coming, and nobody's child could afford to guess wrong twice. Here's the part that should sound familiar. A lion kills one person. A bad decade with no food storage can kill an entire village, parents and children together. That's not a close contest. That's why some of the very first big building projects humans ever attempted weren't temples, weren't walls, weren't monuments to anybody's ego. They were pantries. And that tells you something surprising about what planning for weather actually meant. It wasn't about predicting the sky. It was about not needing to. Stay with that thought because it's about to get tested twice. Most people picture ancient weather prep as fortune-telling with extra steps, reading clouds, watching birds, guessing tomorrow's rain. That version exists. Farmers really did watch the sky for short-term cues later on. But cloud reading doesn't get you through year 30 of a drought. Nothing about staring at clouds fills a granary.
What actually kept people alive wasn't information. It was a buffer. Something dumb, in the best way. Something that didn't need to know what was coming because it was built to survive it either way. Think of it like this. You don't need a weather app to get through winter if your fridge is already full. That's Drought's real trick. The raised floor, the airflow, the road improving, none of that predicts anything. It just makes the food outlast the problem. Which raises an odd question. Nothing else on Earth builds insurance policies like this. So where did that idea even come from? Squirrels bury acorns. Scrub jays hide thousands of seeds and remember most of them for months. Impressive. But that's one animal hoarding for itself for a few weeks. Drought's granaries weren't personal stashes. They were shared, built by a group for a group, sized for a drought nobody currently alive had actually lived through, only heard about from grandparents who had. That's a strange kind of imagination. Picture a future you've never experienced, using a past you only know secondhand. Squirrels can't do that. Humans, apparently, have been doing it for at least 11,300 years. And once a species can picture a bad year before it arrives, that instinct doesn't stay in one clever village by the Dead Sea. It travels, thousands of miles apart, thousands of years apart. Same fear, wildly different toolkits.
Fast forward about 10,000 years. Different desert, same problem. Welcome to Petra, a city carved straight into rose-colored cliffs in modern Jordan. Picture standing in that narrow canyon entrance, stone walls towering on both sides, and only 6 inches of rain falling here in an entire year. Somehow, 30 to 40,000 people called this home. Try keeping a single houseplant alive on that budget. Petra's problem was almost unfair. Barely any water most months, then sudden, violent flash floods the moment rain finally came. Feast and famine, back to back, sometimes in the same week.
So the Nabataeans, Petra's builders, refused to let a single drop escape. Dams slowed the floods instead of fighting them. Pipelines ran for miles along the cliff faces. Hundreds of cisterns were carved into the sandstone and buried underground, cool and shaded so the desert sun couldn't steal the water back. One engineer who studied the system said it wasn't built for one good rain. It was built to keep water moving through the driest month and the wildest flood, year after year. Same idea as drought, 10,000 years later, in stone instead of grain. And it's about to meet its match in a place where the wood itself starts telling a very different story. Head north, way north, New Mexico, Chaco Canyon, roughly 850 to 1130 CE. Ancestral Puebloan builders raised towering stone great houses using over 200,000 wooden beams, some hauled from mountains 45 miles away. No trucks, no wheels even, just people hauling forest-sized amounts of timber across open desert, beam by beam, for a skyline some of them would never live to see finished. Here's the twist. Every one of those beams is basically a diary. Tree rings widen in good years, shrink in bad ones. Archaeologists can read, ring by ring, exactly what the sky was doing the year each beam was cut.
And the rings show something dramatic. Construction at Chaco stops cold around 1130 CE, right as a 50-year drought grips the region. 50 years, long enough that a child born the year the rain stopped could have grandchildren before it started again. Long enough that nobody left in the canyon had ever actually seen it rain the way their grandparents described it. Try explaining a good year to a child who's only ever known a bad one. Case closed, right? Drought killed Chaco. Except, and this is the part most versions of the story leave out, a 2014 study found construction had already started slowing down before the drought even began. And stranger still, people were moving into Chaco during the drought years, not just fleeing it. Some families packed up and walked away from a canyon their grandparents had built with their own hands. Others walked straight into the dry years, chasing the same thing people always chase in hard times, somewhere better than where they'd been. So the tree rings prove the drought happened. They don't prove it's the whole reason people left. Something else was going on. Politics, economics, decisions the woods simply can't record. Nobody's fully cracked it. Even the most sophisticated weather planning in the ancient world had a blind spot. Worth admitting, humans have never been as in control as our monuments make us look. And if that sounds oddly modern, it should. We're still making the same bet, just with better tools. You've heard the phrase 100-year flood. That's not a guess. It's a bet, built the same way Petra's dams were. Take the worst thing you've got on record and assume tomorrow won't beat it. It's like sizing your umbrella to the worst rain you've personally seen and hoping that's as bad as it ever gets.
The difference is obvious. Petra's engineers worked from memory and flood marks scratched onto canyon walls. We work from satellites, rain gauges, decades of data. The similarity is the part that should sit with you a little. Both systems bet the past can predict the future, and both fail the same way, for the same reason. When the weather breaks a pattern nobody on record has ever seen, the buffer sized for yesterday's worst case gets overrun by tomorrow's. Chaco's 50-year drought did that to a canyon full of engineers who'd already hauled timber across 45 miles of desert to prove how ready they were. It can happen to a floodplain map too. So go back to that hillside above the Dead Sea, 11,300 years ago. 4 small buildings, raised floors, no crops in sight yet. You walked in expecting a simple story. Early people storing some food, waiting around for real civilization to arrive and rescue them from being primitive. It's the opposite. These were people who solved the hardest problem in human survival before they'd even invented the thing everyone assumes came first. Not by reading the sky, by refusing to gamble on it. The granary came before the crop. The cistern came before the forecast. And somewhere in New Mexico, tree rings that recorded 50 years of drought still can't fully explain why the people who survived it finally chose to leave. Weather was never solved. It was outlived. Quietly, stubbornly, one full granary at a time, by people who understood something worth remembering the next time the sky looks uncertain. You don't need to know what's coming. You just need to already be ready for it.